PTA and Moore Square PTA. We want to welcome you this morning to this virtual space and this presentation with Dr. Emily W. King. She will be talking to us about strategies for managing stress and anxieties that parents and students are facing due to COVID-19. Before we get started, I just want to quickly explain the format of this meeting. While Dr. King is speaking, we just ask that you stay on mute. Our host today is Ligon's very own Linda Link. Thank you, Miss Link. Our hope is to allow Dr. King to present first sort of fluidly, and then she will answer questions at the end. She's provided time at the end for us. If you should have questions, however, you are more than welcome to write them in the chat box instead of asking them verbally. You can do this privately to me or to Jeff Havener, who is Ligon's PTA president, or you can just stick them on the chat, whatever you prefer. As a disclaimer, the information provided by Dr. King is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, nor to treat any mental health condition or to provide psychological services directly to clients. Listeners are encouraged to seek the advice of a qualified mental health professional with any questions or concerns. And we did provide a slide with a link to crisis help in Wake County for you all. As a quick intro, Dr. King has offered this presentation as a gift to our communities, and we are very grateful for that. She has children in the WCPSS schools, and she is a Daniels Middle School alum, so she is invested and understands what everyone is experiencing right now. Dr. King is a licensed psychologist, a private practice health services provider, and a former school counselor. She has 20 years experience in her field working with children and adolescents, including children with anxiety, but she is particularly passionate about the mental health of parents. Dr. King is a prolific writer. She has a blog called Parenting on Your Own Path. She has been featured in a myriad of journals and news outlets where she shares helpful information for parents. So Dr. Emily, thank you so much for being with us today, and I will turn this over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up, waves. Okay, great. I see lots of familiar faces, even though I think I can only see like 12 of you at one time. But I love PTA. I love public schools in Wake County. I, of course, am a Wake County graduate. I graduated from Broughton. And then went on to UNC. So I have, I'm from Raleigh originally, been in this area, and then did my training in the public schools in Houston. And in Texas, they have a different model for providing mental health in the schools, and the school psychologists are able to do counseling. Kids have counseling IEPs in Texas. And then they have a role called an educational diagnostician that does the testing. So I got about 5 years of experience with mental health, school-based mental health, and it was just, I loved it. It was just so wonderful, and I loved being able to serve everyone. And I know many of y'all know that's not quite the model here, so I'm in private practice here, but absolutely love consulting with schools and all the other providers that my clients have, and then doing things like this, where I can talk to schools and churches and anyone who wants to hear me speak, so I can be helpful to the community as well. So today I'm going to talk about managing stress and anxiety for parents and students. And I'm sure it goes without saying that I have to incorporate us as parents into this. I have two boys. I have a first grader at Underwood and a seventh grader at Moore Square. I got involved in PTA when my oldest was at Washington Elementary. And I love the magnet program and love the just diversity and opportunities that it brings. And I know several of the middle schools on the call this morning are magnet programs. So I just wanted to let you know that I love the magnet opportunities in our county. So I want to start with one of my favorite quotes. And if you've heard me speak before on anxiety, you've probably heard me say this. So this quote is highlighted in the book Uniquely Human by Dr. Barry Prezant, which is an awesome book if you've never read it on working and raising children with autism and just the unique capabilities that they have of viewing the world and really feeling the world. But in that book, he quotes Michael John Carley to say the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. And so that's going to be woven into my talk today of every time we feel anxiety, it's not necessarily because we aren't calm. We certainly can be calm and still be worried, still be anticipating something we're not sure of. It's really that we don't trust the outcome that's going to happen in one way, shape, or form. Sometimes we have control over what's coming, so we trust that we can problem solve it, or we trust that we have a parent who can problem solve it, or a school administrator or a teacher who can problem solve it. But when we can't trust the outcome, which is what we are currently all living, we trust our scientists, but we don't know the timeline. We trust our doctors, but we know that they're human too. We trust our teachers and administrators, but we all know that everyone's human, and y'all are absolutely doing an amazing job and the best you can. And as parents, I know that. I hope that everyone knows that. So I just want you to think through, when we are faced with uncertainty, we either trust our skills to fix it, or we trust the fact that we can figure it out or ask for help. And our kids do that too. And I know anyone who showed up last week knew that this was a postponed talk because I slipped and broke both of my feet last week. And when I think about that, my kids, of course, were like, oh my gosh, but we have a plan for that. We know that you go to the doctor and there's a plan and there's a prognosis for how long I'm going to be in these walking boots. And there's at least a plan so we can relax and say, yes, this is not comfortable. This is unfortunate, but it's okay. Like, we're all still safe and it's going to be fine. For COVID and all this stuff we're going through, we don't have a timeline, and that uncertainty is really hard. And we also have children looking to us for like, okay, so what do we do about this? And we're all looking at each other saying, we don't know what to do about this. Pretty much no one on the planet has experienced this before. We can look to history and we can look to modern medicine, but this is all something we're going to have to collectively work together to figure out. And our kids, for the first time, are having to trust that uncertain process. So that's kind of a backdrop for what I wanted to talk about today. When we don't feel in control as adults, and this is even as adults, and imagine kids have, not completely developed brains, so they don't have all the skills that we have. But when we don't feel in control, we usually try to control, or we use some other coping strategy, whether it's a kind of a good one or a bad one, a maladaptive or an adaptive coping strategy. And sometimes that's kind of taking over and wanting to figure it out, but sometimes it's avoiding and shutting it out and like disengaging from it. And our brains are wired to keep ourselves safe, and we either fight it or we flee it. And that's what we're doing when we're reacting to this uncertainty. So the first caveat to this is I wanted to step back and talk about what our kids have really been experiencing since the spring, and a lot of what school administrators and we as parents have been experiencing. And that's the process of grief. So if you think about grief being denial, which is where we were in March and April. Oh, this is just like a really long spring break. We're just going to be home for a little bit. It's going to be fine. And then April and May and June, we started to get angry about people not following the rules. Like, if y'all don't follow the rules, we're not going to be able to go back to school, right? And then it kind of went into July and bargaining, which is like negotiating with, well, maybe if we do it this way, we'll be able to do it. Maybe if we do this. And then we all kind of somewhere in late July started, depression is kind of the start of the acceptance. We started to accept, like, this is going to be rough. This is going to be like the way it's going to be for a little while, and we got to figure it out. And now we're living in this acceptance of, okay, we have come up with some sort of a sustainable plan. It's still super hard, but we can maybe live like this for a little bit. And I'm saying all this to say that our kids have gone through all of that with every activity they've lost too. And for middle school, it might be, a ritual that they looked forward to, a tradition that they looked forward to last spring or coming back in the fall. It could have been an elective they were ready for that does not look the same this year. So you don't have to have someone pass away to feel grief. That's, of course, the ultimate form of grief and the strongest form. But this process we go through of realizing we've lost a connection to something is this arc of what we've all been going through, to a lesser degree than someone passing away, but it's still there. And if our kids have never experienced a loved one or a pet passing away, they may be feeling sad one day, and as we know, grief kind of ebbs and flows. So they may be totally fine one day, and then they have a memory that makes them feel sad, and they realize, oh, this is what we're doing, and it just is going to ebb and flow, and we need to honor that process for them and for ourselves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the anxiety in our kids might look like, because it's going to look different for every child. And in my practice with families, I call this the flavor of anxiety. We don't all show anxiety in the same way. You know, some people, or kids, especially, and teens especially, just get irritable. They're just irritable and cranky, and something's not right, and they may be acting kind of mean towards us, and it seems like aggression or mean, but really they're anxious about uncertainty. They need a plan. They don't trust anybody around them, so they're going to be cranky towards everyone around them. It could, in younger children, look like regression, or even our middle school kids look like regression. Let's say it was, an independent skill that they had. If they're stressed with handling their anxiety, they may lose independence a little bit and backslide on having the just emotional stamina, the energy to be as independent and upbeat as they were before. And these things can come back around and, again, ebb and flow. So, this is more geared towards young kids. If you have younger siblings, some kids are having, kind of sleeping issues or, feeding stuff going on. And it's stuff that they've had a history of, but they had just kind of moved on from it. And kids are kind of ebbing and flowing in their developmental levels because it takes energy to be independent. And when our energy resources are going to managing our emotions and our anxiety, it makes sense that we might need more help. This is true for us too. Who doesn't feel like they can be completely independent right now and needs a lot of help and their village? This is why we feel so dysregulated, is because nothing is automated right now. Every day we wake up and we make 100 decisions. Back in the spring, there were systems in place for all of this stuff. We had, basically you drop your kids off at school and then people did things for them all day. And then you picked them up and you didn't even have to think about it in the middle of the day. And now we have to think about everything all day long, and that's exhausting. Some people show anxiety like an obsessive or compulsive, like cleaning or hand washing or OCD types of things. So that's a need for control in some way. Some kids get angry, some kids cry, some kids have sleep issues, like I was saying. So anything that's just off about your child or more intense emotionally could very much just be related to the impact of the changes around them, because it's taking a lot of energy every day to adjust to all of these things. And just thinking about, it's probably not your child. It's of course case dependent, but probably not your child just being quote unquote difficult to you. This is all hard for everyone, including them. So when we first think about our emotions as parents, if anybody has followed Dr. Lisa Damour, it's Damour. She is a best-selling author that writes books about girls, teen girls. She's a wonderful writer, and she's often in the New York Times, and she had a quote last week that was, every year, this is true, but especially this year, our kids need us to be kind, patient, and predictable. And I know those are things I don't always feel. So whatever you need to be that for your kid this year, that's why our mental health needs to come first, and we have to put on our oxygen mask first, which is completely counterintuitive to the human nature of parents, but it's so important, because when we ease our stress, it just reverberates onto them and it eases their stress, and they can look at us and say, I know you don't know how to fix this, but I trust that you're going to stay calm and figure it out. Just trusting yourself to figure these things out. So it's normal for us to feel really sensitive to stuff right now as adults. It's normal for us to feel like we're maxed out, because this is all a lot for anyone. But I don't want you to see that as a failure, because it's not. Anytime you feel like, oh, I'm overwhelmed by this, I can't do this, it's not a failure. It just means that you've reached your emotional limit. Think about your emotional resources as a bucket, and they're overflowing. And this comes and goes depending on our sleep and our stress in other areas of our life, and our financial stress, our relationship stress, all these things that go into our day. So it just means when you feel overwhelmed, or if you have that feeling of, oh, I'm totally failing at this, think, okay, that means it feels like it's just too much. And what can I do to outsource anything? It could be asking some of your, one of your kids to step up and help a little bit more, even though you're not quite sure if they can do it yet, but you at least have, your middle schooler there helping you to do it. It could be, making sure that you're getting more sleep if you can. And I know this isn't a happy recommendation for many of us, but some of our success does come from getting up a little earlier for that quiet time to plan the day, or staying that a little bit later to have that quiet time to plan the day, and having these routines for our kids, which I have strategies for routines we'll talk about in just a minute. And the reason that managing stress is so important is that stress shuts down learning. So if you've ever been stressed out to the point where you feel panicky, it feels like our brain's being hijacked, because it is. And so our emotional brain is hijacking our cognitive, our thinking brain, where all of our problem solving and our language is. And it's why we can't recall things really quick when we're stressed. It's why we
can hear you.
It's why we can't learn anything when we're stressed. So think through how much of the day you're feeling stressed, or how much of the day your child is feeling stressed. And that's the problem to solve first, instead of pushing, showing up and learning all the things. And that's stressful. That's where we'll get more behavior or resistance or stress, because it feels too overwhelming. Again, all their emotional resources are going to managing that stress, and they're not available for learning. So they feel that from us as well. So we want to really adjust our goals for 2020. And if you follow me on social media, you saw I had a post last week that talked about, this is not 2019. I don't want you to have 2019 goals. In 2020, we want to keep our kids safe and stay connected with them, and take care of our mental and physical health, and maintain our relationships. Because we all have been with our family a really long time. And I know that I felt comforted to hear the teachers' voices, even though it was remote that first week of school. I'm like, we're not alone. And so it's really helpful to maintain those relationships. And if we can come out of this with the learning that comes next, once all those things are in place, they will learn something. And so we don't have to problem solve every single little thing that our kid brings to us. I know that maybe prior to 2020, we were able to, but we can't really do that right now. And so let's see if they have a plan, or if they can come up with a plan. Maybe, especially at middle school, we're in this flux time of, do they want to email the teacher, or do they want us to email it and they're copied? There's a lot of scaffolded independence that goes on in middle school. And maybe they have an idea. They're all getting really comfortable with remote learning, and, sending a chat message or sending an email. I know that my son has been more independent than I actually realized in this platform, and which is great. And I had no idea it was going to happen until I kind of saw it right in front of me. But they're being asked to step it up too. And they're actually more flexible with the tech stuff than we are. So we need that energy to therefore help keep stress low, help them solve problems when they need us. So first, think about your sleep, your water intake, your social time, whether it's virtual or not, your time in nature, your boundaries with work. Just like I'll talk in a minute, for them to set up their workspace, which I'm sure a lot of you have already done, so they can walk away from it at the end of the day. We have for working parents, we have all of our emails on our phone. We can see at any time. We really have to be intentional about maybe their blackout hours, where we're not looking at any communication outside the house. Maybe that is during mealtime, or maybe it is after a certain time in the evening or a certain time in the morning. That can just be helpful for boundaries, so that we can be present and looking up and at our children when they're there with us, because they're here all the time. So we do need to strategically plan when we're having family time versus other things we're doing right now. Okay, so shifting to how can we best support our child's mental health. So of course, this varies across kids. You could have a child who struggled with anxiety before this. You could have had a child who never struggled with anxiety, and now you're all of a sudden seeing some stuff and you're wondering, how to handle it. So the first foundation of everything is creating routines. And this is for everyone. And the reason routines are so helpful is because when we have routines, we automate things in our brain. Who has driven to work before and haven't even thought about it? And especially if you've ever tried to drive to work on a Saturday and you're like, what am I doing? We automate things in our head that once it's automated, we are not spending much cognitive energy on that. And so your child last year could probably have walked blindfolded to all of their classes at school. They could have probably figured it out because that's automated throughout the day. And one thing I'm hearing from some kids about virtual learning, and I don't know what other middle schools are doing, but I so commend More Square, who has super consistent link information that logging in each class is the same every day. Because kids are not physically walking to different rooms, it's kind of hard for them to memorize what to go next. They're just thinking of a link, and that's not contextual in any way. So I'm seeing some memory impact, and that it's harder to remember. They're spending more energy remembering their schedule. Whereas before, and this is true for all of us, I'm doing telehealth appointments, and sometimes I have a memory of talking with someone, and I remember sitting at my computer, but I can't remember which client it was until I look at my notes. Whereas before, in my office, I had more of a contextual memory of the time of day and maybe what I was wearing and what they were wearing, or any of the contextual cues I think that we use. It takes more energy to do those things. So anytime we can create structure in this new routine is going to be helpful. So we automate that for our kids' brains. And on the flip side of that is try not to micromanage. So there's a balance here. If we micromanage tweens, we're going to get pushback. So try not to micromanage them. Think about a skeleton of a routine being school hours, mealtime, sleep, and then kind of recreation, social time. That's the anchor of their day. And then whatever they're doing within school time or within social time is their choice. So there's still choice to it, but the routine think of it as just anchoring their day so they know the order of things they do activities in, and that can be helpful for them. And then building in a sense of community even to your house. So we talk about this on a bigger scale as a community kind of pre-COVID of helping our elders or having some sort of service project or things that help kids, all the PTA volunteering we do with kids, helping kids feel a part of their school community. Without that right now, we thrive on a sense of community. So there is a lot going on virtually. And I think it's I know More Square is creating Google Sheets for interest groups for kids so they can get together online and things like that. But even within your house, having your child think through how can they be helpful in terms of different chores that they probably already were doing, but maybe even more, especially because everyone's running low on resources this year. Energy resources, emotional resources. What is it they are capable of? Yes, they might hem and haw about this at first, but if they get into a routine with it and then they get positive feedback of that was so helpful that you took out the trash or that you emptied the dishwasher, that you fed the dog, it just starts a positive feedback loop of interaction, and they start to feel more a part of the family. And some families, this had kind of gone by the wayside before because we were getting really busy especially at middle school, with extracurricular activities. So this could be a time to just bring that all back in and rely on each other inside the home with routines. Any type of traditions you can start too. Since we've been doing this for almost 6 months, you may have nature walk traditions. You may have game night traditions, neighborhood connections you've made that you wouldn't have made before. So anything like that, keep it up. Anything that's slightly into the community that you can do, keep those things up also as routines. And really think intentionally about what brings your kid joy. And don't wait until they're upset or sad go ahead and schedule that in their week. So it may not be something every day, but whether it's social time or nature or music or animals or coding or whatever it is that brings them joy or makes them kind of interested and motivated to learn something new, schedule that within their day so that they have that to look forward to as well. That can be part of a preventative strategy for keeping our mood stable when things are uncertain. Because anytime we can count on, if you think about it, if I trust this routine, I feel steady in this routine, I trust that at least this is going to happen today, as opposed to everything feeling uncertain. So I wanted to talk a little bit more in detail about social, because this is so tricky right now. We don't yet know the impact of this extended year or however long it's going to be with kids not in person. I know a lot of us have created, as best we can, some small groups for our kids, whether it's in the neighborhood to play with or even to do remote learning with, who we feel kind of our bubble can be extended. And that is great if we can do it, but not all families can do that. So we just have to keep an eye on kind of the long-term impact, and we just watch those anxiety symptoms, whatever your child's kind of flavor of anxiety is, kind of watch, are we seeing increased irritability? And don't hesitate to, put some of these routines in place for bringing joy into their life, but also don't hesitate to reach out to a therapist, someone like me, who we're pretty much all doing telehealth right now. So it could be someone who's like across the county or even in a different county. We're all licensed pretty much by state. So as long as they're in North Carolina, you can find a therapist to talk with your child. And then I believe I'll have, I know there's some administrators on the call. I believe Wake County school counselors are doing remote sessions. And I'd love one of the administrators to speak up later to clarify that. But I believe if that Wake County has some resources if you need to reach out to the counselor at your school. So in light of creating routines, how can we create social routines? So remote there, and I've talked about this all summer with people, and my thoughts keep evolving. But of course, at this point, not all screen time is created equal, right? I think pre-COVID, we were like, screen time's bad, and that's it, But now it's like there's social screen time, and there's live screen time, and there's recorded screen time, and there's school screen time, and there's like passive endless YouTube watching screen time. So I kind of see it on a continuum, on a spectrum, where it goes from like live interactive educational screen time, of course, is going to be, the content's going to be really high, but kids are still going to get fatigued with the screen, all the way down to like something like passive YouTube watching, which to us is like Instagram and Facebook scrolling. Although you may watch YouTube, I don't know. But to the adult version of that is more of just like, we're not even thinking about it. The content is coming at us. We're not interacting with it. That's more of, you can kind of zone out on that kind of thing. So just think about the continuum of screen time, and the social part of like, let's say playing a video game with a friend and they're online talking to each other live. That might be the best we can get right now for social interaction. And so I'd say pick that over not socializing at all. And we're just trying to still be mindful of the content of what they're playing, as well as the extent of time that they're playing. Yes, it's social, but are they doing it so much that they're not getting outside in nature, or whatever it is that you feel is best for your kid? And then thinking through, if your child is introverted, I'm hearing this a lot from my introverted kids. They're not hating this so much. They actually are okay with online learning because they don't have to manage all the social noise, especially kids with sensory sensitivities. Middle school is a loud, busy place. I know some kids have said, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about fire drills. There are things in the school building that are stressful to some kids that they've learned to manage. But the chaos of all the walking in the halls and all of that is gone. And for some kids, that's a silver lining. So thinking about what feels like it's working well, and even could some of this be extended beyond COVID? Like, for instance, I know some kids have really benefited from having one-on-one Google Meets with a teacher or an administrator or a counselor prior to getting into the big group Google Meet. And that's something we do meet the teacher, and you may have met a teacher before, but some of these Google Meet one-on-one conversations are really intimate, and the kid is being able to like show their pet and show their room, and that's stuff we've never done before. So see if there's something social like that worked for your child, and we could even continue that after this. I think it's important to also intentionally connect them with adults outside the family. You know, we do this naturally when we're not quarantined, you know, like coaches or, you know, other people who teach music lessons, things like that. And of course, all of our teachers and administrators. Kids need to hear the same thing we're saying as parents from other adults. I joke that like 50% of my job as a child therapist is saying the same thing that the parent has said, but I've just established a relationship with the child and I'm not their mom. And so this is so true. And I think that it's just, you lose credibility when you are the unconditional person in a child's life. They know you're not going anywhere and you're not choosing to hang out with them, as opposed to maybe, you know, a teacher, they feel like, gosh, I think that teacher really likes me and like respects me. And they feel that connection. And that's, it feels like they did something to earn that. Whereas with parents, they're like, oh, that's just my mom. She's here anyway, you know? So there is a difference in adult connection socially outside of our family. And so see who you can reach out to, even if it's virtual, for some support if you're struggling, if your child's struggling with some behavior or anxiety, to talk that through. So in terms of just emotional kind of regulation and anxiety for our kids, once they're into the school routine, they may start having, and I think we're kind of hitting that wall this week. The first, you know, orientation, they were kind of like, it's like the virtual honeymoon that we're all used to, the honeymoon period of like the first few weeks. And now that there's work coming in, we're kind of hitting the wall that we're in the routine of school, and they still might have like that Sunday night dread, or even the every night dread. Like, I don't want to get on the computer again tomorrow. So talk with them about that, you know, validate that. Maybe it's a calming routine you do at night or in the morning. Maybe it's a like quick 5-minute virtual check-in with a teacher for a pep talk. Say, we can do this. I'm here if you need to jump over here in this Google Meet and talk to me. And just reminding our kids of the things that they can do when they're home right now. Like on their 5-minute breaks between classes, they can get a snack. They can go flop on their bed, and then hopefully they'll get back up again and go to the next class. You know, whatever works for your child to regroup. Reminding them that they couldn't do those things in the school building, and communicate with teachers. So I know that I've heard this feedback from teachers. I'd love for some teachers on the call later to express anything they'd like to, but teachers can't they can see us, but they can't actually, I don't think, feel like the stress in the moment if our child is frustrated with the task or what's going on in the background, or just the whole feeling of what this feels like to our kids. So reach out and say, this is what this feels like on the ground in my house, and what can we do to maybe adapt or change it up. They're a little bit flying blind in some respects, I'm sure, about they're trying to teach what they have to teach, but within this new context. And they need our help to bridge that gap of fully understanding what that's feeling like on the other side of the screen for our kids. So when our kids are having emotions on this side of the screen, communicating that with teachers is going to be really, really helpful. And then you may notice some like unrelated anxieties, and I'm hearing this a little bit, and it just depends on the child. Sometimes parents will say, gosh, my child has these random nightmares, or these you know, random fears about something that doesn't even seem related to anything. It's possible for our anxiety, I kind of call it like anxiety whack-a-mole. Like, we get this part of anxiety under control, and then it manifests over here in this other way. You know, our emotions are just fragile right now. So it's possible for your child to be showing anxieties in different ways. So just anything that's kind of unusual or more intense than they usually are, you know your kid the best. Watching that, figuring it out, and then reaching out for help if you need it. So I wanted to go through some strategies for this final point on academic independence, because I think that part of the anxiety and lots of the questions I get are around anxiety about this process, about this remote learning process. If anything goes wrong, like somebody's mic doesn't work, or, I can't see the video or whatever it is. I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of meltdown in my house this first 2 weeks of my kids not getting things to work. And we just have to remember to tell them, everyone is figuring this out. Your teachers understand, especially middle schoolers. I think they kind of panic and think they're going to be late for class or not get attendance in. But I know administrators and teachers understand that everyone's troubleshooting this. And we ultimately, our internet could go out. We ultimately don't have control over whether we're going to show up to that class. And that's really dysregulating for all of us. But just to remind kids that their teachers know that their teacher's internet could go out. I mean, at some point we just have to say, this is all kind of ridiculous and we're just doing the best we can every day. So thinking through their academic independence, making sure that they have a workstation. So I know in the spring, we were all kind of cobbling it together. We were flying by the seat of our pants, and maybe we were at the kitchen table, or maybe they were at a desk in their room. I'm sure you've had this figured out by now because we're kind of in the second week of school, but I know my son has already moved to a different space. Like, we set up one in his room and he felt like it wasn't enough for him to move around for breaks. And so he's relocated to a bigger space in a multi-purpose room we have, where it's a bigger desk where he can spread things out. And he, I wouldn't have thought that he needed that, but he felt like, okay, if this is how I'm going to be learning, this is what I need. So ask your child, what do they need to feel comfortable now that they're seeing and understanding the pace of the day, how much work is coming in, what they need to do, and alternating those things and putting boundaries around, this is the school space, and then these are the times of day you're here, and then you walk away from this and you socialize and do family stuff. And so there's a clear, I'm in this and I'm done with this part of the day. I think we also have an opportunity, like I mentioned before, to talk to our kids about self-advocacy. We're talking with them a lot more, I feel like, about, how is this working for you? And even when they're talking about the content of school, what's hard for them, what's easy for them, what do they want more of or less of, especially at middle school. We start to bring them into all of these conversations, and we don't want to be making all the decisions for them. We want to take into consideration how school and learning feels to them, and then collaborate as a team with the teacher or an administrator about whatever decision it is we're thinking about. But like I mentioned with like emailing or sending a chat to the teacher, asking them first how they might solve the problem. They might surprise you. They might say, oh, I'll just email the teacher about that. And then you could maybe be copied on that, so you kind of are in the loop about what's going on. But I always recommend at middle school, parents are copied on emails so you know what's going on, but your child can take the lead so that you are preparing them for in high school, where they are taking the lead on emailing teachers to problem solve things. And sometimes kids don't get independent with that until about 10th grade, but at least kind of 8th and 9th grade, we really start pushing that. And let's just normalize all the tech difficulties, like I said before. So having backup options to communicate with school, if you we all have the, apps to talk to teachers, and just ways to let them know if something goes wrong and your child is very overwhelmed with anxiety about some sort of tech issue. It is going to be solvable, whether it's just a time frame, but they may miss something, and giving everybody some grace on that is just going to be really helpful to let kids know that everyone is doing this, and it's everyone understands when stuff goes wrong like that. One thing I'm noticing that's the hardest for middle school is that middle schoolers are asked to go to the most classes. So if you think about this, elementary, they have the different subjects. They may be going out of different specials, and then magnet schools, they'll have electives. But then high schoolers are on block scheduling or AB days. So they have fewer classes per day in high school. Our middle schoolers are asked to go to 7 classes and they're younger than high schoolers. So it makes sense that the pace of this is like rapid fire. I don't know about you, but I sometimes felt like orientation was like speed dating. It was like check in here and then check in here. And I think they're getting used to it, but that can be really stressful if your child has a lower processing speed. So for instance, they just need more time to process what's going on. And that's something to be communicating with your teacher of saying, they're getting this, but we need way more time to work on it or figure out what's going on, because that may look different in this format. And if your child needs like a break time or a check-in with a teacher at an elective time or before and after school, just communicating with teachers on if that's possible. I wanted to talk a little bit about kids with IEPs. So if your child has an IEP, most schools have probably by now contacted you about having a remote learning addendum to your IEP. So basically saying, I know we developed all these goals prior to remote learning, but this is what it's going to look like within remote learning and how we'll be implementing that. So reach out to your child's case manager or an administrator if you haven't gotten that call yet, because that's something that can be helpful, especially if you need to add any accommodations. Like for instance, obviously preferential seating isn't needed right now, but there may be something like chunking tasks or, shortening, if you have an IEP, shortening a task because you've mastered the concept and it's just taking too long and you're tapped out from the being on the screen all day. So talking with your child's team about that can be really, really helpful. And then in middle school, of course, we have curriculum assistants. Not all kids with an IEP have a curriculum assistance class, but those classes are super helpful for checking in with your teacher about helping coordinate how all these things are going, because is a ton of variety of independence at middle school. Some kids are not independent at all yet, and some kids are totally independent. There's a huge range. And so it's just this kind of time period where kids are all over the map developmentally with their independence, and reaching out to the CA teacher or the counselor if your child doesn't have an IEP, or an administrator or whoever else the administrators on the call tell me to tell you to reach out to, so that you can coordinate what you're seeing in your home that looks like anxiety and how we can at least best problem solve that. So kind of in summary, before we talk questions, remember your own anxiety first and helping you be calm and predictable for your child, and patient, which is really hard these days. But ultimately, those characteristics in you will help your child feel safer and more predictable at home. And it's not about solving every problem. It's about your child trusting that you'll figure it out, whether it's you that figures it out, or whether it's you and part of the school team, or you and a doctor, or you and whoever you can reach out to for support, but that your child looks to you and trusts that you can problem solve that plan with them. That's where anxiety can feel lowered, when they trust the plan. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back over to Jess or Jeff, and I think we probably have some questions to talk through.
Okay. We just have a few questions.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So this one I thought was really good. For more introverted kids who are on the surface appear fine with spending 100% of the time with family, do we need to push a bit to encourage social time with friends in some form, or should we follow what the child says?
So this is all going to depend on the child's, really what you feel like the child's mood is doing. So a child who is kind of happy, content, not irritable, like totally happy, and they spend time in their room, maybe chatting with friends or then sometimes with the family, that's different from a child who is irritable and shut off from the family and wants to be left alone. So gauge that one by mood. If kids are feeling completely content and happy at home without friends, I mean, certainly check in with them. about do they want more social connections. I know I'm checking in with all of my clients probably every single time I talk to a kid since March. I have asked if they were lonely. I want to know how they're feeling, if they want more social interaction or less social interaction, so we can plan that for them. You may talk with them and they may say, well, I'm fine here, but it would be nice to, have a virtual hangout with a friend, or maybe go on a walk outside or see another kid in person. They may not share that if they're very introverted until you ask. So checking in with them for sure, but in general, gauging that one on their mood versus their behavior, because some kids can be completely content hanging out at home. And I think I will add, outside of COVID, we, of course, big picture, want to make sure our kids are getting a variety of social interactions, so they're interacting with lots of different people. But I feel like the goals for this one during COVID are just a little different. We're just wanting to maintain mental health and keep kids happy.
Okay. Our next question, Dr. King, has to do with start times and just the adjustment between elementary school and middle school. So my 6th grader is having trouble adjusting from the 9:15 start time to 7:30 for middle school. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, so usually what we recommend is just the physical adjustment of taking about a week before school starts, or starting now over a period of like 5 days, and pushing back bedtime by 15-minute increments, like 15, 30, and making sure that they're getting enough sleep. We are all capable, if we don't have any type of sleep disorder, we all are very capable of just shifting our sleep patterns. We do it with daylight savings and with travel all the time, but for some reason it seems like if our work or school schedule changes, we resist it. But if you go to bed earlier, you will wake up earlier. So it's some of it is helping kids shift that sleep pattern, and the other benefit to a consistent schedule is sleep specialists will say to not get up, not sleep in an exorbitant amount on the weekend. So for instance, pretty much, this is a rough estimate, but usually just an hour or so on Saturday and Sunday, different than what you would do Monday through Friday. And the reason is, if you think about it, and I talk to teens about the older teens because they're sleeping till like 1 and 2 o'clock, right? So I will talk with them about comparing it to jet lag. So if you, let's say, and not like European jet lag, but let's just say California, like 3 hours different. If you were on a trip 3 hours different, and then you came home, you would not expect to get up 3 hours, off the next day. You would take a few days to adjust to it. That's kind of what we do on the weekend when we sleep in, and then Monday morning is like, ugh. So if we don't get off our schedule, like if we wake up, we only sleep until like 7 or 8 on the weekend, it's not going to be as hard to get up Monday morning. But if we're letting them sleep till 10 or 11, then it could be harder. This is also tricky in the first few weeks of school because kids are exhausted. So there is a time frame of adjustment for sure. I would say give them a whole month to get used to the 7:30 start time before you're thinking that there's a concern about it, because it does take kids, even remember, on a regular school year, it takes a couple weeks to get adjusted to the routine. And I feel like orientation was helpful because we were adjusting while we were problem solving. And there are things that have been changed over orientation in the first week of school that we've had to adjust to. So I think it's going to take us a month to get into the school year, because it usually takes us a couple weeks. And now we've changed things somewhat, whether it's, changing a class or changing how we're doing our work or where we're doing our work in the house. So I would give it a whole month to adjust to this new situation.
Okay. Next question is, should we be requiring kids to get outside during breaks, or should we let them veg out if that's what they prefer?
I think sunshine and vitamin D is helpful for everyone, even if they are someone who doesn't love being outside. I'm hoping that this gets better as the weather cools off. I know summer is hard for lots of kids, especially, I mean, middle schoolers are some of the most irritable of the bunch because they are wanting to be independent, but they're so not independent yet. And they are very much opinionated about it. And so we're going to get the most irritability from this group. And that's completely expected. But if I do think it's good to mix this up, I don't think it's necessarily positive to force a child outside all the time, of course, if they're not really an kind of outdoorsy kid. Some kids are really sensitive to heat and sweat and bug bites, and they just don't like it. But if there are times of day, like early morning or late afternoon, that are more pleasant for them outside, the sunshine is just chemically good for them. The vitamin D is good for them and can really help mood as well. So I think that alternating, and this is again when the routine comes in, if a child is resistant to being outside, scheduling it and going with them. So let's say you do I know most of our kids have an hour for lunch now. Doing a walk at lunch, if you have a parent home and available to do that, and scheduling it into their day. So they're not you're not nagging them at every break, and they don't know when you're going to nag them. And so they're irritable. That's the other thing about scheduling it. If they expect it every day, they know you're going to say it. If you randomly try to go outside here, go outside there, it's going to feel like they're anticipating you asking them to do something they don't want to do, and they're going to probably feel more irritable about it. So just schedule, think of, I'd like him to get out or her to get out once a day. Maybe let's do it at lunch, or let's do it after school, because, or if they will get up before, just to be outside once a day, I think is healthy for all of us right now.
Okay, one more question, and this has to do with camera use in the classrooms, which has been asked a few different ways. In this instance, how do we help kids be willing to be on camera in the classroom spaces to know each other? Sixth graders in particular need this connection, obviously, because of the tough circumstances for making new contacts.
Right. So this one is going to be specific to kids. So I'm just going to ask some follow-up questions to think about. So there are lots of kids with social anxiety that do not like to see themselves on camera. It's kind of like trying to work looking in a mirror all day. Like I have almost trained myself when I'm doing these to look at my webcam as opposed to all the faces, because it's hard to gauge. It's just distracting, right? To look at all those things. So think through if your child is not liking seeing themselves or not liking being seen on camera. Wake County is allowing children to turn off their cameras. Sometimes that helps with their attention, because if they're constantly anxious about being seen or looking at themselves on camera, they get distracted by that anxiety. And they can actually focus easier on, there's a lot going on. There's the teacher sharing her screen, there's other people's faces, there's the teacher's voice, and then I have to do the work over here, and I see myself. Like, that's a lot to process. So if your child has trouble processing all those visual things, it's good to minimize the distractions, and you can pin the teacher's face up so that you can't see any of the other people. But then the other part of this, I would say, is if we're wanting kids to get more comfortable with being on screen, doing it at preferred times. So for instance, not requiring it when they're working on a hard academic skill or they're trying to speak up in a class they feel anxious in, but doing it during a social time, and maybe just with one kid first and then expanding the group. Think of all of this as kind of gradual exposure to certain situations where we all need a little bit of gradual exposure to get used to things, to adapt to things. So think about what's driving that for your kid, whether it's anxiety about looking at themselves or being seen, and whether it's a one person, one-on-one thing, or whether it's a big group thing, and kind of scaffold how you might want to get them used to that. That makes sense.
Okay, we just have one more question and then we will wrap up. And this one has to do sort of on the other side of that, the lack of a collective struggle. So this is, my daughter seems to exhibit most anxiety when she thinks she's the only one having trouble. these online quizzes and questionings don't help. It's hard when she can't see the other kids struggle too, and they're not comfortable. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so this is one of those instances where I'm seeing it be really helpful when a teacher or an administrator do a one-on-one Google Meet with a child to say, hey, this is what this looks like on the other side of the screen. You know, this is what it looks like from the school perspective. I'm sitting here watching all the kids or seeing the teachers, and it might be really helpful for that child to hear you know, just the stories of what's going on, because like I was saying, like I can only see, actually, I think I can see 16 of you and half of you have your camera off. So I have no idea who I'm talking to right now, other than the fact that I know that it's 100 people, which feels very different from if I think about if I was in a room of you. I could see your faces and I could see if you were nodding along or not. You know, I have no idea how this is going. So I felt that early on in quarantine when I was asked to do some virtual things, and I had absolutely no idea if it was helpful or not. Because when you're speaking in person or when you're sitting in a classroom with your peers, you totally have a vibe of how it's going and you see other people's body language. And I would just, you know, think that just talking with an administrator or a teacher and that child knowing that someone's helping them get connected. Some kids need an extra connection to feel into this process. And some kids are like, oh, I'm used to this. I know they're there, even though I can't see them. And some kids really need just that touch point, even if it's virtual.
Okay, I think it's 8:30, and that is actually the last questions that we have received on the chat. We have recorded this, and we will be providing it to the Student Services Office for each of the schools, in addition to getting it out there via PTA communications. Dr. Emily W. King, thank you so much for taking this time with us this morning. Is there anything you would like to say to end before we let you go?
I just want to say, keep communicating with your schools, because we are all by ourselves in these little silos all over town. And your teachers and your administrators want to hear from you, and your other parent friends want to hear from you. Just keep communicating with everybody, because we are all we'll come out the other side of this at some point. And as long as we keep those relationships up, and that goes through our family, but also our parent to school relationships, that's gonna be what gets us through this.
Thank you so very much. We really, I cannot stress how encouraging this has been for everyone. So we appreciate your time so much.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Take care, everyone. Happy Thursday.